Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trout streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Christian. We're back on the line this week, and I've got another special guest for you this week. I'm really excited. We have Kevin Sloan from Skwala Fishing on the line, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second here. First, before we get going, please go check us out on YouTube. Subscribe, follow us there. There's tons of content that has come out, everything from leader designs to tips, show episodes, etc. And of course, our podcast is available online at www.ffipodcast.com, along with the blog and tons of articles. So we're excited there. Kevin, you're on the show this week. It's great to have you. Again, you are the owner and have operational experience within Skwala fly fishing, but you started out your career in fly fishing at 10 years old, fly fishing as a young youth. 19 years old, you went into a guide scenario, guided for a while there. You spent time at Orvis in the development side of things and really started to move through the fishing and outdoor industry. In fact, you were a huge proponent in the development and expansion of MeatEater.com and or the MeatEater podcast, which is amazing to hear. And then on top of that, you were a part of the team that developed Sitka as well. So you have all this amazing experience. And as you explained to me, my true heart is in fly fishing, and it's everything fly fishing. It's not just trout, but it's from tarpon and triggers to trout, etc. And you followed that passion into Skwala and developed a really fine product. If you guys aren't familiar with it, Skwala is primarily a wader company, but you produce all kinds of really technical gear. And I think if I would propose it, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Skwala is an organization that really focuses on bringing gear with a purpose for fly fishing versus I'm just going to generate another hoodie type shirt or sun shirt, etc. Is that a correct assumption?
Absolutely. Yeah. First off, thanks for having me on. Excited to have a chat with you. Yeah, I think everything at Skwala, when we think about product, everything has to have a reason for being. That's super important for us. And so, yeah, we don't do product for product's sake. We have a pretty narrow product line. We launched with, when we launched the company, we had just 11 products. That was it. Now we're not that much larger. 2 years in, we're, I don't know, 20, something like that, and don't see it. We don't ever see us having a 60, 70 page catalog. Our goal is to build product that has a reason to exist. And whether that is because it's super light, fast, highly breathable, highly packable, or just the most bomb-proof, durable thing we can build. But all of it has like a reason for being in the line. And, for me as being a complete and total gearhead, that's what I love, because everything that we get into is not about building to a price point. We don't have good, better, best products. Everything we build is the absolute best product we can build for an intended end use.
Yeah.
And so it's a different way to look at it.
I love that. Not building for good, better, best, right? We're not bargain or budget shopping on Sitka. What we're doing is shopping for a purpose, right? And I really like that aspect of it. Let's do this. We're not going to talk a ton about Skwala. We know it's a fantastic product. We know you can go check that out online, guys. But what we want to talk about today is swinging for trout. And then we have a gear washing tip for you guys at the end of the show that Kevin has an intimate, detailed background on. So he's going to share some things there. But swinging for trout in particular is an area that you have interest in and you do quite a bit. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's probably, these days where I live in Southwest Montana, probably half my trout fishing these days I'm doing with a trout spay rod, swinging flies on a two-hander. Some of it really comes from my love of steelheading, that's been really a lifelong passion for me. Um, but one as being a steelheader, it's hard these days, especially if you really like to chase native fish, which is kind of the world I like to play in. But it's scaled down steelheading, and what we found around here, trout love to eat on the swing, just like they did 100 years ago, and that's how most people,
Right.
fly
Right.
fished. It turns out they still love it. But it's for me, it's kind of scaled down steelheading. I love the casting exercise in it as well. It's even though I've been casting a two-hander for 30 years. I think first time I fished a spay rod I was in high school, which to date
Hmm.
myself will say I was right around 1990. And so even after all those years of doing it, I don't feel like I've ever perfected it. And every cast I make is kind of like a different journey. So it keeps me engaged really on that side, as well as when you really scale down getting down into like 3 weight and 2 weight spay rods.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's kind of micro steelhead fishing. A 20-inch rainbow on a 2 weight spay rod on a swinging. I actually swing flies that look just like my steelhead flies, only they're that big instead of that
Micro
big.
sized. Okay.
Yeah, I tied two stage intruders and stuff like that, but they're an inch and a half long instead of 5 inches long. And so I like the whole process of the trout spay thing. For me, it's all fun from the fly tying end of it to the casting end of it, and honestly, the grab on a big fish on a really light spay rod's really fun.
Yeah. When you you talked a little bit about a few things there that were pretty in the technical side. So you typically in like a 2, 3 weight realm. Is that where you
Mhm.
like to kind of stay with that? And
Yep.
then do you throw more of a Skagit style line, or are you throwing more of your typical spay short head or long head lines?
It depends on what I'm doing. In the trout spay, you don't really get into the long head stuff at all. I
Hmm.
still fish some like pretty long classic spay lines on occasion. Um, but most of the trout space stuff is almost like a short Skagit. The way I rig up, I kind of have three rods. So I have a 2 weight that has more of a Scandi style line, because on the 2 weight,
Hmm.
I'm really just swinging real small soft tackle type things. And then in a 3 weight, I use a like what the original Rio trout spay, which is a Skagit-ish line. And then on a 4 weight, I have a short Skagit, and I use my 4 weight actually to throw fairly sizable streamers. And so
Hmm.
that's got kind of real short, compact, heavy head on it.
Hmm.
So I kind of bring the
Okay.
three, and depending on the run I'm in, I'll grab, if I'm fishing a riffle, I'll grab the 2 weight with a soft tackle. If I'm trying to fish deeper buckets, like this time of year in the like more winter type water,
Hmm.
then I'll run a little heavier rig.
Hmm. In your heavier rigs, do you ever run like a sink tip on those things, or
Oh
do you
yeah,
run?
I'm running a pretty stout sink tip. On a 4 weight, sometimes I'll run up to a 12 and a half foot full sinking like T8
Okay.
sink tip on it.
All right. Interesting. And then you said you primarily fish like smaller steelhead flies, and
Mhm.
do you also fish like standard trout flies as well, buggers and things like that that you have luck with, or
Yeah,
do you?
for sure. I think fish on the swing, when they see the way that happens and the way it comes into them, I think a regular woolly bug will work. I like stuff that wiggles a bit more, and
Hmm.
whether that's for me as an angler, which
Right,
is
right.
probably it, right? To be real, it probably has
Yeah,
more to do with me than the fish.
right.
Um, you're right. I think being at their level and showing them the presentation they want to see. I believe this in all pretty much all trout fishing stuff, is how you show it to them matters a lot more than what the fly is, unless they're really
Yeah,
keen
yeah.
on a hatch. But yeah,
But
it's
part of that's confidence, right?
yeah,
It's like if you have confidence in the fly, then you have a better ability to get it in front of them. I think, you know.
sure. Yeah, and some of it's the ingrained gearhead in me. Like I probably own 15 trout spay lines, right? And I own a full set of sink tips from floating to the fastest sinking thing I can throw for every one of my rods. But you know, some of that's the fun of it for me
Yeah.
and one of the reasons I think I enjoy the trout spay thing is there's the gear side of it involved, but there's a constant adaptation. So whether it be, your casting, or whether it be how you're rigging, or what your head setup is and how your flies or your shooting heads, and it's just kind of endless stuff to play with.
It is. And I want to ask some questions around that because spay casting for a lot of standard anglers, standard rod, overhead casting, they finally get through the technique and feel really comfortable there. And they're like, oh, yeah, I want to try this spay thing. Or they get introduced to it, but it's such a new world. It can
Mhm.
feel so different. So I have two questions for you. One what are maybe your recommendations on getting into it? And two is, what could they do now with their standard setup that is very similar?
Yeah, so I mean, the beauty today of learning to fly fish is the internet, right? And
Mm-hmm.
especially specifically YouTube, because the cast is quite different. But there is a tremendous amount of info that is out there from some really great people. Whether it be like George Cook or Simon Gosworth, or there's lots of videos that those guys have done, and in a casual setting, it's people who have filmed the spay claves and things like that, where
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
learn a ton, right? Those two guys in particular, I just think are great, kind of very easy to follow, grounded instructors. But if you can get someone, if you really want to get into it, if you can find someone to actually teach you, um, there's a lot more nuances to it than there is to single hand casting. And having someone walk you through anchor points, and when you cast a single spay versus a double spay, and when you cast offhand versus your dominant hand, and that kind of stuff, um, really would be helpful if you can find someone in your circle and in your life to spend some time with you, or you
yeah,
know hire a guide and go for, even if you're an experienced angler, go for a day,
yeah.
um, or two, and I think you'll learn a lot. I know very few people who would say that they have spay casting 100% figured out 100% of the time. Whereas I know a lot of guys that would say that with a single hand rod, is that like they've got it pretty dialed. It's one of the things that I actually enjoy about it. It feels like it's a constant, focus and evolution on your casting. And I don't feel that way with single hand casting after, all the years I've
Yeah,
done it. I can kind of pick up a single hander and do what I need to do with it. I'm constantly trying to be better with my casting and concentrating on my casting with a two hand rod. It's just one of the things that I like about it. It kind of keeps me engaged all day.
yeah. I feel the same way. The casting for me in spay casting or Skagit is that setup and that thought process. You're so much more engaged in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if it's the, like you said, it's a longer learning curve or not or whatever, but like the overhand thing is like you can get away with a lot with standard casting, you know, and then you develop, oh, now I have a roll cast, and that becomes kind of fun and tricky, and you play with that, and then you learn your curve cast and et cetera, et cetera. But they're all so paramount and fundamental to one or the other, and they seem to line up very quickly. But spade casting to me is like, well, you get out there and it's like you really got to think about it. At least
Mm-hmm.
I do. Um, and then you
I
get it
think
right.
almost
Like,
I think almost everyone does. Like even guys
yeah,
who that's what they do all the time. There's always things to think about, right? And if you have an upstream wind and you anchor on the downstream side, you'll learn the hard way,
right, right.
about how to think about your casting. Right? The
Or even
feedback
just
in the
the
back of your head is real. Uh,
right, or even just the big, roll cast where you're like really hammering down. You're like, man, why is this thing just piling up on me? It's not really shooting like I want it to, and
mm,
things like that. It just changes the dynamic. I think
yeah.
I'd like to talk to you about people get the question of, somebody asked me the other day, why don't more people spay cast in trout fishing? And I said, well, that's really funny because, I'm heading out to the lake right now to go do that because I can get way out there with it.
Mm,
And she asked some more questions. And I says, there's two things that I think, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective is one is not a lot of people, I think, really understand it and know how to do it. And there's equipment that comes with that. And then the other thing is you're in a lot of small rivers around here in Utah and et cetera, and people feel they don't have the room. But I think that's a misnomer, don't you?
mhm. Well, in some way, are you talking about some of the spay casts with a single hand rod too?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
because that's a thing that I've learned over time that I actually use. Um, I use a bunch of those casts with a single hander, right? Because it takes a spay cast is not a roll cast, and it's very different in how you drive the line forward and how you accelerate. And um, once you really learn to do that, you can adapt that into a single hander. And like I can, what you think of as a roll cast, I can do a single hand kind of roll cast. Sorry, with a single hand rod, and actually like shoot significant line doing it using some of the
Hmm.
techniques I've learned with the two hander. And I think it's a great add to people's kind of skill set. Um, with a single hand rod. You can
Could
get
you
at a lot of
talk?
places.
Yeah, could you talk through some of that technique difference for us?
I think the big one that you learn with a two hand rod is like your anchor point is really critical, right? If you miss your anchor point, and for those that don't understand that, it's kind of where you place your fly before you start the forward cast would probably be the easiest way to explain that. And when you learn that, which with the spay rod is often about the length of your rod and kind of quartering off to your right, and slightly in front of you, it'd be the best way to describe it. Like 45-degree
Hmm.
angle at rod's length is how I look at it. I'm sure there's a bunch of people who think that's wrong, but that's always how
That's
I
spay
view trying to
casting.
get to my yeah, how to get to my anchor point. And once I learned how to take that and take some of those, like a double spay cast. So you're crossing your body, getting your anchor point, and then coming back and setting your forward cast up. Um, Once I learned to do that with a single hand rod, I went from a roll cast, which I could do 20 feet, to being able to literally shoot line with a single handed rod off of what would be considered a roll cast with no back cast.
Hmm.
And so that's some of the stuff that I had learned was like you can do a lot of things with a single hand rod if you think about how you're going to get that anchor, where you're going to get that fly, and how it's going to anchor before you cast.
Yeah,
To me, it's been
it,
really helpful, especially on small stream stuff.
it is. One of the things that's really helpful is, eliminating your backcast and getting out of
Hmm.
the small stream weeds or bankments, things like that. And then the other thing I've found is, especially, if you're going to I like to swing flies. One of my favorite
Hmm.
things to do is to swing wets on the way back down a river where I know I have to hike up and then
Hmm.
turn around and hike back down. I change my setup and I'll just walk a couple steps, swing some flies, and I'm using that like roll cast, or I use some of those spay cast type casts to do that, and it becomes, for me, that rhythmic moment in fly fishing where you're just kind of flinging line and having fun and waiting for the interaction, but you're also feeling the line and feeling the tug of the currents and setting your flies up. It's a different element, and I really love that that
Hmm.
scenario. But I also see a lot of people who they don't spay cast, or they don't understand that type of casting, and or they don't get into it, because
Yeah,
they don't have the spay background. So.
yeah. I think you find this rhythm. It's funny. I had a buddy out about a week ago, I think last Tuesday, who had spay cast a couple times, but hadn't really spent a day swinging flies like for trout. And
Mm,
at the end of the day, he commented, he's like, I kind of get this. I go, one, it's really relaxing because he's like, you get into this like thinking about the currents, thinking about the drift, and a little bit not to take away from other parts of fly fishing, but I think there's like more things going on here that you're thinking about that cast. You're thinking about how it's swinging through the water. I think you're more in tune with all that. And he goes, and you're not thinking about rowing a boat, and you've kind of slowed everything down because you're wade fishing, you're out of the boat, you're kind of in the river, and I think that's partially what I love about it. But it took him as like a somewhat newbie to point that out, to be like, that is one of the things about this style of fishing I really enjoy.
yeah. The other thing I like about it is it's such a feel game on the eat
Hmm.
side of things
Yeah.
and the drift side of things, that I don't have to watch my line. I can like almost be a lazy fisherman, I guess is the way I would describe it, is like I can cast and I could be looking around, and because I'm not focused on my line, I'm so focused in on the feelings, and I can
Yeah.
tell where I'm at in the water, how, like you said, the current is whipping the line, or where the grab is coming from, etc. And so I can have this this little more holistic enjoyment of the atmosphere that I'm within while I'm
Yeah.
fishing. It was
Yeah.
really, really fun.
Yeah. And I think there's actually, I think there's a bit of a benefit to not being that focused on the fly, because I've certainly less so in trout, but certainly more so in the steelhead, where I've seen one come up and push and roll on a fly before I felt it. And you don't
Mm,
want to do that because you'll take it away from them, right? You want to
right,
let
right,
them,
right.
like I always tell people with steelhead, I'm like, let them eat it. I let them chew on it. I don't lift the rod. I don't set the hook. I just let them,
Yeah,
I let
take
them
it.
do their thing on it. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Um, okay, so the next question is, these spay rods are longer rods. You can cover all this water because you can make these long casts, and people get fearful of, well, I don't know if I have the local waters to do that in. What are your comments on that?
I'll tell you the first one that I think is kind of a misnomer of spay fishing, period, including like really big rod stuff, is has to do with the length of the cast. Um, I often fish pretty short and just throw the
Mhm.
head and a little bit of shooting line. I think depending on how you view this, like we talked about there's I don't know, a little bit of the Zen side of swinging flies. But the other part of it is it's really efficient. If you want to swing flies, I think part of the deal with a two-handed rod versus single hand, because people were fishing steelhead with single hand rods forever, right?
Yeah.
Is how efficient it is that you just pick up, you make maybe it's only a 50-foot cast, and we can all make a 50-foot cast with a single-handed rod, but we're not stripping line in, we're not false casting, we're not doing all these things. It's a very simple motion, and you're spending, when you think about steelhead, where you often could be looking for a grab a day kind of thing. I always
Hmm.
look at it as it's like often it's like one encounter a day type fishing, and if you can figure out how to be in the strike zone 35 or 50% more of the time, which I believe fully I can do that with a two-handed rod. Um, that might take you to 1.5 grabs a day, might take you to 2 fish a day,
Right.
right? And like,
Right.
but just the efficiency of those encounters, I think, is one of them. I certainly, especially with a trout spay with a 3-weight, like I don't view that as a tool for long casts. It can be, and yeah, maybe you can reach, a little bit farther, but I'm almost never casting farther than I could easily cast with a single hand rod. I'm just doing it in a much more efficient manner because I'm not doing the
Hmm.
stripping in, I'm not doing the false casting and all that. And I think even it's funny. One of my uh, favorite places to fish in British Columbia, specifically on the Skeena River, we kind of laugh like if you're in more than calf deep, you're in too deep because those fish love to slide up the inside bank. And so it's not about bombing a cast 130 feet out into the middle of the river.
Uh, yeah.
Um, it's about really effectively and efficiently covering water. And I definitely hear that as like people see the two-handed rods and they're immediately thinking that we're throwing 100-foot casts all day long. And it's um, you can if you want to, but that's not really the purpose.
Yeah.
And it's hard to fish those long casts. They're like if to fish really effectively.
Yeah, you have a lot of
Um,
line out. There's more slack in your line because it's like you said, whipping in the currents, et cetera, et cetera. You can't feel it as soon. All those things, and then you got a fish that's way out there. You got to
yeah,
bring in.
yeah, it's just lots more stuff to go wrong, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
is it sometimes fun to go bomb casts out? For sure, but
yeah, yeah,
that's definitely not how I view the two-handed world. It's more about effectively fishing and as like a really efficient tool to do it. Um, More so than this way to cast a long distance.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny because that has a lot of carryover to standard overhead fly fishing that you see all the time, right?
Hmm.
Where you said, "Oh, you go out and it's this skinny water. You want to be calf deep at the most." But what do you see on standard fly fishing? Guy walks up to the river and the first thing he does is walk straight out to the hole and makes his cast, and you're like, dude, you just stepped over probably 10 fish doing that.
For sure.
You should have fished off the bank first, kind of thing. So,
Yeah.
um, it's so
Yeah.
funny how
More is not is not always better, right? And
right,
one of the things, like we fish drift boats, here where I live a lot, and in a drift boat, you're trying to bang the bank, right? And certain rivers around here, like the Madison, the difference between being 5 inches off the bank and being a foot off the bank is like double or triple the fish. Those fish are pinned on the bank, like often in the summer, like on the Madison, they're pinned on the bank.
yeah,
And it takes a good angler to be able to get a good drift on that bank. But if you understand that, why would you be waiting out at all, right? Like I see the same thing with steelhead. Like I see people standing where the fish actually want to be if they were left
Right.
alone.
Yeah.
You watch steelhead in a especially if you get to go hike up like a like a spawning tributary or something where that's closed to fishing, so you have fish that are totally left alone. Watch where they are. They're not in the heavy runs. They're not deep in the bottom of the pools. They're sitting on the
Yeah.
insides of corners and in tailouts and where happy fish want to be.
Right. Yeah. The efficiency phase, right?
Hmm.
Like, how do I get up the
Yeah.
river with the most efficiency? So,
Yep.
very cool.
Yeah, that's a lot of like those skeena fish. Like they slide on the inside and they'll be in 20 inches of water. 20-pound fish
Mhm.
might be in 25 inches of water or less.
So let's talk a little bit back about this trout stuff. When you're trout fishing with your spay lines, are you fishing a lot of seam currents? Is that where you're trying to aim? Are you fishing more bucket style? Maybe give us a couple tips on like, hey,
Yeah.
if you're going to start to swing flies or swing flies in a spay scenario, these are some things that you should be thinking about.
Yeah, so well, it'll all depend on the season, right, and what the fish are doing. So you got to pay attention to that first. Ideally, I love to fish a big long run because I think that's kind of where you get into where spay rods are really effective, and also where you kind of get into that rhythm. I,
Hmm.
I love a big run that'll take me an hour to step and swing through that run, but it all really depends on the season, right? So like now it's early April here, our water's pretty cold, right? In a lot of cases, it's still under 40. And what I look for in that scenario, and this is regardless of whether I was swing fishing or anything, often those fish I kind of look at it as it's slow walking speed water that's in the 3 to 5 foot depth, right? It's
Hmm.
it's waist deep, slow walking speed, and that kind of seems to be where those fish want to be this time of year. Um, where sometimes I'll swing soft tackles during like we have the Mother's Day caddis hatch coming up in
Hmm.
this area pretty soon. And those fish, that's the first time they'll kind of move into the fast water in the riffles. And in that scenario, I'll shift where I'm fishing. But you really got to pay attention to maybe not what you want to fish, but what the fish want to do, right? And
Hmm.
so if you have fish that are left alone, they'll be in tailouts in certain rivers. The Yellowstone here is one. Like a lot of times, the biggest fish I see that I don't catch all year, I'm shocked because they're all the way in the tailouts of the river. But I think, as you go through the season, is knowing water temperature and where the fish are, what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if we got a hatch that's about to come off caddis hatch, they're going to move all the way up into the shallow riffles because that's where those caddis are and that's where they're coming off.
Yeah.
Um,
And
where
there's
dead,
ways to get that info too. I was going to say is, go to your shop instead of asking what flies I should be using, ask, hey, where have you been seeing the fish?
yeah,
And that'll give you a clue. Yeah.
yeah. And if you're new to the two-hander game and you're trying to figure it out and don't have a mentor, is get that information from the shops of like what's going on, right? If they're telling you to fish nymphs in 5 and 6 foot runs in slow water on the insides, and adapt your two-handed setup to do that. And if
Hmm.
the fish are, if we got hatches coming off and the fish are moving up into a riffles more aggressively, then adapt your setup for that.
Hmm.
I think that's true with all of our fishing, right? People get into a mode of something that works, but don't necessarily um, adapt seasonally. I
Yeah.
forget who I was talking to the other day, but they had told me, they grew up fishing these small streams with their dad in a pretty rural area, so a place that didn't have a lot of pressure. And they're like, we never fished anything other than a Royal Wolf because when I fished with my dad, we were fishing in July and August and we were fishing small streams and, trout that weren't pressured that loved to come up and eat a tractor dry fly fishing. And then he started expanding his fishing season and was throwing Royal Wolves in April and couldn't figure out why he couldn't
Why
catch a
can't I
fish,
catch
right?
anything?
Right?
Yeah,
Because he was fishing a Royal Wolf in a riffle where, it was April and the water was 36 degrees and he needed to be, you know, halfway through that run in the deeper, slower water.
that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it is funny. It's funny how you can make mistakes like that, especially going from, unpressured stream fishing into a style of fishing that's definitely more of a match the hatch kind of style or something like that,
Mhm.
which promotes the movement of the fish. I think the other thing that was really cool that you pointed out is you can go to a shop and they can say, go nymph the hole or go do this or go do that. But in reality, you can fish that same water but just use a different technique.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
for sure.
some people miss that. And swinging is a primary, I think, really good example of how to do that, right? Because you can swing all types of water. It's just really your setup and understanding of what am I targeting? How am I
Yeah.
getting my fly to that location? So I really like that. You talked a little bit about, hey, this is my step and swing type of water that I like to fish. What I'd love for you to do is just walk through what is your step and swing methodology? How do you go about that? Because not everybody's used to that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so for me, I like these big, ideally, if this is where the fish want to be. I'm not gonna do it if that's not where the fish are. But if I can find a good long piece of water, 100 yards long, in some cases we have a few rivers around here where I can have some runs that are 200 and 300 yards long, which
Mhm.
will take 2 hours to fish, kind of thing. But I'm casting out, quartering downstream, letting my fly swing around all the way straight below me, and then I'm taking a step or two down. And so,
Mhm.
depending on how clear the water is or how cold the water is, I may just take one big step. And I kind of look at that as you're going to show the same presentation again and swing across the river.
Right. It's
And
like
we're
a
always casting,
fanning technique, right?
yeah, right. And we're always kind of casting the same length of line. One of the key things with a spay rod is that you want to cast all your line on every cast. So however much you have stripped out. So as you take a step down, if that step is 3 feet, the next time you swing through, you're swinging 3 feet farther down in the run.
That's right.
And then you'll make your next cast, you'll take another step down. Like in clear
It's,
water with steelhead and more aggressive fish, sometimes I'll take 2 full steps and sometimes more, because those fish can see a big bright fly and move for it.
mhm.
Trout fishing in the winter, those fish aren't moving far, right? You got to kind of put it in their face. And in that
Mhm.
scenario, I'm probably taking one step between every cast,
Mhm.
and then
And
trying to
when
trying to do the same cast every time.
Yep. And I love how you pointed that out because if you have, say, 50 feet of line out and you take a step, you're really only moving your fly the distance of that step if you're using the same
Correct.
amount of line. That's what you want to do is fan that water and cover as much as you can. Now, when you make your cast and you set your fly up, whether it's with a mend or whatever, you get the right drift and it comes to the end of your drift. Do you perform a dangle and let your fly sit there for a few seconds? Do you do any kind of lifting? What are some of the techniques that you like to use within your swing that maybe add some value for you?
Yeah. For trout versus other things, I think is different. I think a steelhead wants it slow and smooth. Um, for trout, I'll throw different stuff in. I'll strip. I'll bounce the rod.
Mm-hmm.
Um, sometimes like a rhythm bouncing the rod through your swing could be really good for trout. Just kind of, I always think of trout as this is for stripping streamers too, like out of a boat or single hand rod. Is like think about playing with a cat with a piece of string and how you would
Yeah,
twitch it, stop it,
that's
pause
great.
it,
Yeah, I love that.
and that's always how I think of anything predatory for a trout, whether it be stripping streamers out of the boat or swinging. Sometimes they want it slow and really smooth. Sometimes they want it to bounce, and I'll mix it up. And I think as long as the fishing's good enough that you're getting enough encounters to get a point of view, I definitely have found that moving the fly some days is the magic, right? It's like um, there was a couple times this fall when I was fishing with my son, who's just my 14-year-old son's just getting into the spay thing, and I was teaching him how to kind of bounce the rod, and all of a sudden, bang, you got a fish. And then we were kind of saying like alternate your casts. Let's do one smooth swing, one bounce it. I strip it sometimes too, just little twitches along the way.
Yep.
Um, and we like 100% found a preference. Like we probably caught 14 fish, 15 fish that afternoon swinging, and I bet we alternated casts, and I bet 11 of the 15 came on a move fly
The
in some
moved
way, shape, or
fly.
form.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'll fiddle with it until I find, I get enough encounters, whether they be grabs or fish I catch. Um, you almost know when you're swinging flies whether you have an encounter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Generally you're not pinned on the bottom. So if you feel something, whether it be the strike, or sometimes all you feel is the pressure come off your line. I've had that
Right.
where a fish will swing on your fly, and you're like,
The
oh,
fish is coming forward, and you're like, why does my line feel so light? There's no pressure.
yeah,
Yep.
the tension came off, right? And sometimes that's a fish, and you never feel it. But is definitely play with it and mix it up. And some of my friends that do this quite a bit is, especially as the water warms up, and or if you're fishing in the fall, they're actively stripping the fly as soon as it hits the water. So they're
Mm-hmm.
setting up a cast and not just letting it swing. They're stripping and putting motion on it the whole time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But you got to play with it until you figure out what the fish want. And I think
Yeah,
that's in all of
I'm
this
this.
is my word of advice I to people is like, don't just do the same thing, right? It's like
Yep.
people who fish the same river and fish the exact same holes. We used to call it like, don't follow the paper route. Don't do the same thing every day.
Yep.
Is constantly exploring different things that they want, and you'll find that they want different stuff on different days.
Yeah, one of my favorites is just like a trigger pull on the line as it's coming
Mm-hmm.
across, and just trigger pulling it with that little bit of
Yep.
action, something about it. And then of course at the end of my drift, I always love a slow lift and a drop. I usually put
Mm-hmm.
3 in. And
Yep.
it's amazing how many times you're like, oh yeah, I did it. And then like the third lift, you're like, wham, there goes one.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's a great feeling because your line's tight, man. That thing takes it, and it's like I'm hooked up. Now you'll miss fish. I miss fish at least.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yep.
but man, when they grab, it is it's an amazing feeling. I mean, it's just
Mm-hmm.
like I've got him.
Yeah.
He's on. And it's off to the races. And then having that line out, I think is super fun. It's away from you. Being able to control the fish and fight it from those scenarios. You
Yeah.
mentioned the flies that you fish, small intruders and things like that. Do you primarily fish single fly setups, or do you run some double fly setups? What are your preferences there for trout? Does that change?
I'm almost always single. Um, in fact, very rarely. A couple times I've tried like 2 soft hackles, but um, yeah, generally I focus more of my time and effort. This is true in most of my fishing, but more of my time and effort in getting the presentation right. And if I don't think they're going to eat an olive streamer and not eat a black one, kind of thing, in this kind of
Mm-hmm.
presentation. And so I spend more of my time focusing on getting that presentation where I need it, right? Am I deep enough, or am I fishing too deep? Do I need to be fishing shallower, or the fish on the banks? And focusing more on that. And so I don't actually mess with flies a whole lot. I can tell you, in the last year, I bet I've spent 80% of my time fishing one single fly.
Can you share that with us? What is the
Yeah,
fly that you like?
it's so there's a fly called a thin mint, which is kind of a standard streamer. I think it was originally
Mm-hmm.
designed for lake fishing, right? It's kind of black, olive, and brown type woolly bugger.
Yeah.
And I'm fishing that, but tied in a spay style. So that kind of black,
Mm.
olive, brown pattern, but I'm tying mine on a tube. Um,
Okay.
but they'd be a
Very
size
cool.
of, they'd be like a size 6 or a 4, probably like a size 4 if you were going to tie a standard, you know,
Hook size.
uh,
Yeah.
yeah, hook size thin mint, but I'm tying them on tubes so I can change my hooks out. And then it's tied a little bit like it's like a thin mint had a baby with an intruder.
Mm-hmm.
So it's that kind of look and feel, but tied with 2 stages.
Little
But
bit more action and flutter to it, but that's about it.
that's about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then I have another one that's kind of olive and black with some rubber legs. But for trout, I seem to like natural colors. And then something that's, got some movement in it. So as that thing kind of comes around, it's not just a stagnant fly swinging, it's wiggling and jiggling and doing its
Yeah.
thing. Um, but
That
yeah,
intruder
I'm not,
style. I was gonna say that intruder style also gives you a lot of that pulsing action, like you said.
it,
When you start to do that
yeah,
movement, it really does build on that.
yeah, yeah. But I don't mess with flies a whole lot. And then when the hatches are coming off, I'll go down to soft hackle, the caddis hatch or whatever. I'll go down to like a soft hackle type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But again, not overthinking it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Classic soft
Yeah.
hackle stuff seems to work great.
Yeah, it does, and it's great on a single hand. You know, I always
Hmm.
say it all the time. If you're not swinging wets, go give it a try, especially during a caddis hatch. You know,
For
they're
sure.
primarily feeding on emergers, and you think they're feeding on dry flies, you'll start smashing them really quick. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. Like there's sometimes I laugh like what's old is new. Like I'm, if you look at what I do for a living, what I'm super passionate about, I love playing with new and different things. Um, and I like my fly boxes are stacked with all kinds of stuff because I'm always looking for the next thing. That's just my how my mind works. Um, uh, but there's sometimes like what's old is new is like old school soft tackles and stuff still work, and it's still a really
Oh
fun
yeah,
way to fish. It's just kind of fallen out of favor, right? It's like,
yeah,
and but it's sometimes fun to break some of that stuff out.
yeah. I remember early on fly fishing, and a friend of mine, his father, he loves soft tackles,
Hmm.
and we were up on the Madison, we were having a little bit of trouble, and we're like, man, they're just not eating. They're not eating. He's like, I got a crazy idea, but why don't we start swinging soft hackles from the boat? And I was like, all
Yes.
right. Well, next thing you know, we're like, wham, 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 just like crushing them. It was awesome. An awesome
Yep.
experience. Really cool. Well, let's do this. We're running out of time. I would like to talk about your tips around washing gear.
Mhm.
Obviously, you have a ton of background on that, and it'd be great to hear your experience.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tip I give lots of people. I've worked in technical apparel for a long time now, 20 plus years. And one of the things I found that's been really consistent, regardless whether it's hunting gear, fishing gear, you name it, when you get into really like premium technical gear, whether it be a hard shell jacket, rain jacket, or waders, is people seem to be afraid to wash them. We've heard this forever. And one of the things is you ask people, how many people actually wash their waders? And it's pretty rare. Most people are like, wow, I never even thought of doing that. And so one of the reasons that I bring this up for people is your gear will perform better if it's clean. This goes for your jackets, anything, right? Is like when your jacket's got gink all over it and it's got dirt ground into it, it's got lots of sweat and body oils on the inside. It's actually not performing very well. It's not breathing very well anymore at that point. The face textiles are probably wetting out when it hits rain. The jacket's probably not leaking, but the face textiles are wetting out, and then your breathability and stuff all completely falls off. And so,
Mm-hmm.
and the same thing with your waders, right? Your waders, a pair of breathable waders is a really technical piece of gear, right?
Yeah.
And it's getting asked to do a lot. Like it's one thing to keep dry in a jacket. A wader is a fully submersed garment. It's not just shedding rain. It's actually fully submersed. So it's pretty unforgiving. And when they stop breathing or whatever, it's very noticeable. And so one of the things I tell people with waders is like, please wash them. They'll work better. Um, you want to do it carefully. You want to run them in like a delicate cycle. Only ever wash them in a front load washing machine, never a top load. If your waders wrap around that agitator in the center of a top load washing
Mm-hmm.
machine, it'll wreck them. So please don't do that. Uh, but a really gentle cycle and make sure they're rinsed well. Turn them inside out. I prefer to hang dry them. I'd be careful with throwing them in a hot dryer because you just don't know how hot your dryer is,
Yeah.
and it could at some point release the seam tape. But um, with mine, I probably wash them every 10 days I use them, kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that surprises a lot of people. But like they're always performing really well. And as waders get dirty, it can cause failures. It can cause seam tape to erode. But more than anything, it's going to, they're in a lot of cases a waterproof breathable wader is a $600 to $800+ purchase, and you want to take
Yeah.
care of that, and so you get a lifetime of use out of it. And one of the best things you can do, other than don't run through barbed wire fences and briar patches in them,
Right.
is take care of them, keep them clean,
Yeah.
and all of it will perform a lot better. And it goes for like really all your technical gear, but specifically in the waterproof breathable realm, people seem to be afraid to wash this stuff, and I'd encourage you to keep it clean and wash it, and it'll perform better for you, and it'll last
Very.
longer, quite frankly.
Yeah. Good advice. I have a couple questions. Detergents. What kind of
Mm-hmm.
detergents do you use? Because people ask about, oh, don't use heavy detergents. Don't use these. Use a Nick Wax. Use a
Mm-hmm.
specialty brand. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I specifically I like some of those tech washes like Nick Wax or Granger's.
Hmm.
So yes, that is what I'll use. And there's two things that I do when I wash my stuff. Is one is use a good detergent like that, like a technical wash. You don't want to use you don't want to use like heavy liquid detergents because they have all kinds of additives in them and UV brighteners to make your clothes brighter, that kind of stuff. So use a good
And
clean.
sorry, but I don't want to forget this, but don't put fabric softener, liquid fabric softener in there. It is like the worst thing you could do.
100%. Yes. Never do that. And what that does, just so people know, that clogs up like kind of the pores in the face textiles. Um, so I do that. And then the second thing I do is I retreat for DWR. And so over time, DWRs wash out as we move to PFAS free DWR over the next year or two. Well, I'll be kind of moving there. Those definitely don't bond as well as the technologies we've been using, and so retreating your garments with a DWR treatment, like a ReviveX type product, after you wash them. Again, it's going to make your products perform way better. It's going to stop the face textiles from wetting out, but you got to keep them clean first, and then retreat them. And so my thing is I wash them probably every 10 days, turn them inside out, let them dry, write them, and I spray them down with DWR and then let them set up that way for a day and back in the river.
Okay. Um, I only have a top loader. What do I
Yeah.
do?
Don't,
Can I just wash them in a bucket by hand or in
yeah,
the tub?
wash them in
It's
your tub.
totally fine, right?
Yeah.
Next
Yep.
would be, um, do you turn them inside out to wash them, or do you leave them
I
right
do.
side out? Okay,
I
so you
turn them
turn them
inside
inside
out.
out.
Yeah, again, we mentioned this a little earlier before the call, but like if you think about your waders, right? You wash all the other clothes you wear, and most of those are like highly breathable. With a
Yeah.
wader, like all of that sweat and everything is staying on the inside. It doesn't have anywhere to go. And so like the moisture side of your sweat will pass through, but that's kind of partially where I say keep them clean, right?
Hmm.
So I turn them inside out when I wash them. I take the buckles and stuff off so they don't get hung up. But I mean, really, it takes a minute to prep them.
Right.
I wash them inside out. I let them dry inside out, and then I turn them right side out and I spray the outside down with DWR. That's my process. And after many years of like testing different ways to do this, that's really what I found is the best way to keep your gear performing.
This is my last question, and this is maybe a little off the cuff of washing, but it's something that seems to happen with waders, and I've had it happen to a couple pair of mine. And you think your waders are maybe over, and maybe they are. I don't know the exact detail. I know there are tricks to this, but what happens is you put on a pair of waders, you wear them, and you realize that the wader's sweating. And at first you feel like, oh, I must be sweating a lot on my legs. And then you realize, no, they're actually like sweating a little bit of a leak into them. There's
Mm.
no pinhole, but they seem to sweat more. And it's like the repellent factor has starting to gone away. Is that the DWR treatment wearing off? And or
Yeah, what
what do you
what what you're
recommend there?
yeah, so let me explain what you're probably experiencing. So there's a couple things. One, and we see this with our testing machines on waders, where we're putting a wader under a lot of pressure. So we test we're trying to keep water out, so we test with water. And so when we test a wader that has come back, maybe someone tore them and we're repairing them for them, whatever. We fully test every wader before they go back out. And what we find is when they put them under a lot of pressure, and like we put them under a lot of pressure, like almost the point where if you flick them, they'll ting a little bit, like they have that much water pressure in them.
Mm,
We'll find leaks and holes there, like pinholes that you would never find waiting. There's not enough pressure pushing in versus the type of pressure that we're doing when we test them. And I think in some cases, what you might be feeling is you're not seeing a wet spot because there's not that much water coming in, but you might have a series of pinholes that are really,
mm,
really small. Like around where we are here, we have a lot of wild roses, which are like very fine needles. And I always say it's like death by a thousand little death by a thousand cuts. Um, so you might have 10. Sometimes we'll find someone on their shin will have like
mm.
10 micro holes they never knew that their waders were leaking. They didn't send them back in because the shins were leaking. But we'll find that. So it could be that. The other thing that could be is your actual sweat. So like we're perspiring all the time, and we
Hmm.
focus a lot at Skwala about highly breathable. So like our whole view is we keep you dry to keep you warm. So we think about that when we do, even how we do insulation and puffy pieces and things like that, is how do we move the most moisture away from you? In a
Hmm.
wader, you don't have as much of a buffer there. Um, and what happens when the DWR wears off in a wader? The face textile is fully wet. It's up against the breathable membrane, and the membrane doesn't breathe as well when the face textile is wet out. And so,
Hmm.
what you might be feeling in that scenario is actually it's you sweating on the inside, but the breathability of the wader isn't performing that well anymore because the face textile is either dirty or wet out. Which is this actually comes
Gotcha.
back to why you want to wash and
Yeah.
retreat your waders. More often than not, like if something's really dirty, if you have a lot of dirt ground in, or you see this a lot with guides, is like, they always wipe their gink and stuff off on their wader legs, so their
Yeah.
waders are like filthy black. Your
Yeah.
breathability, where those waders are like full of silicone and dirt and ground in, your waders are
Guilty.
not.
Guilty.
Yeah, and if your jacket looks like that too, like you see that a lot with like a guide's jacket where they're wearing
It's
sling
always
pads
the
and stuff
same
on the
spot.
shoulder.
It's my left upper shoulder or my
Yeah,
right lower leg. Yep. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
your jacket's probably not breathing very well in that area anymore, and same with
Mm.
your waders. And this comes back to wash your stuff, keep it
Yeah.
clean. It'll treat you better if you treat it well.
I do have one more question, and I've seen this recently. People are getting advice to use like bits of silicon, either whether it's split 50-50 with acetone or whatever, and rub it on their areas. And what's your feeling about that kind of thing?
Rubbing it on the apparel,
Yeah, they rub it on
I
like, oh,
actually.
I have a couple pinholes, maybe I rub it on there, and I'm
Oh,
curious
to
to hear.
find the pinholes.
Well, to cover them, so they'll use like a silicon, like almost like a caulk, and they'll mix it with a acetone, or they'll use something like that. And it's
Yeah,
like they come up with these formulas, and then they go, "Well, that's how I repair them." And I'm like, "Oh, I don't know about that."
I haven't heard that one. I would tell you this: don't use acetone. Like, uh, you don't want to use
It seems like
anything
it
that
would
does.
break the barrier between the two
It could
layers.
it could delaminate the textile, which is 3 or 4 layers. It could do that, which is that's a full failure when that happens. So you don't want to do that. The other thing is something like an acetone. Uh, you can run into this a bit with DEET. Like if you don't want to you don't want to soak
Mm,
yourself in 100% DEET either. But like DEET and those things dissolve. They dissolve things. Acetone dissolves things. That's why it's used
mm,
for as a thinner and stuff. You do not want acetone getting underneath the tape on the tape seams of your waders, because it's designed to dissolve things. You don't want it dissolving
yep.
the glue on the tape, because then you will be wet for sure. Because the tape's what's keeping the water out. I would 100% not play any of those games.
Yeah.
So two things I would recommend with your waders is, if you tear them and you have the time, send them back and let us fix them. Or whoever the manufacturer is, generally, we can do a much better job than you can at home, because we're going to use, like what we do for tears and things like that. We use the seam tape that the wader is actually constructed with, and like a
Mm-hmm.
hot press, and it's very controlled. Like we know exactly how long it takes and the heat it takes to melt the glue to get like the perfect bond, right? Because we've
Mm-hmm.
spent a lot of time studying that, and that's how we'll repair them. So what I tell people is, certainly if you get more than a 1 inch rip and things like that, if you can afford, if it's not dead in the middle of the season, you can't afford to let them go. Send them back and let us fix them, because we can
Yep.
do a pretty permanent fix in that scenario. Um, and then if there's smaller pinholes and things like that, there's lots of really good things to use that are proven, that aren't going to be like a heavy chemical. There's no
Mm-hmm.
reason to use heavy chem on this stuff. So for quick hit stuff, um, I always carry tenacious tape with me, and I do that regardless. I started actually doing that, a lot in the hunting side. Tenacious tape, a little tiny roll of tenacious tape, or you can actually get pre-cut patches
Mm-hmm.
from Gear Aid. They're fantastic, because like if you're hiking to the river, I always talk about the barbed wire fence tears because we know what they are. When you
Yeah.
see a 1 inch tear on the inside of the leg, regardless of what they may say how that happened, we kind of know how
Right.
that happened. And tenacious tape is like real time. You're like, shoot, I just tore my waders. I'm on my way fishing. I don't want to not go fishing. Stick it on. Um, and it's an instant bond and fix.
Hmm.
You may want to have it taken off later and have it repaired in a different way. But in the field, real time, that stuff's amazing.
Yeah.
And the other one for small stuff is some of the UV. I really like some of the UV um, patch glues. Like Loon makes
Mhm.
one that's really great, and it's
Okay.
yeah. You got to learn how to use it a little bit, but get it in the shade, get it underneath your shirt, get it exactly where you want. If you did just do like a puncture, and then
Yeah.
just turn your waders inside out and turn them to the sun, and it is ready to go in 30 seconds.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
Um, so I would say don't get super creative on this because there's really one like we know how to do it, and you you don't need to be creative here. Like the stuff that
Yeah.
exists today that we know how to do is really good. And so I wouldn't go being super creative. I would use some proven methods or if you can let us fix them.
Yeah. And I'm always the same way. Like, be a little conservative. You've got an investment in a pair of waders. Like, take good care of them.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think that's really important, and the washing's a big part. If you were to send a pair of waders in, is it best to wash them before you send them in
Uh,
for
yeah, I
repair?
would say required.
Required. Okay,
Yeah, no,
that's what
we
I
tell
thought.
we tell we tell people that before they send them in. And it kind of goes back to my like washer waders. Some of the
Yeah.
stuff that we see is pretty amazing.
Oh yeah, I can only imagine, especially from like the east where the humidity's high and you probably end up with mold on taping and it eats away at the glue and all that. It's absolutely crazy. Well,
Yeah,
Kevin, hey man, thank you so much for being on the show. It was really great having you.
yeah. Thanks for
Appreciate
the
all
time.
that you shared, especially on the trout side. I'm going to go swing some flies this year for sure, and hopefully come
Fantastic.
visit you up there in Montana. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, let us know when you're here. Thanks a bunch.
You got it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
See ya.
Fly Fishing Insider Podcast is teamed up with Fly Fish Finder app to revolutionize your fishing adventures. Save time and unlock the ultimate experience with access to 55,000 trout streams, precise bridge data, thousands of trails, and detailed species locations. Elevate your angling with real-time maps, top camping spots, and connect with local fly shops for expert tips. This is only a little bit of what is available on the app. Discover all of it on the Fly Fish Finder app, another tool for getting better at catching fish anytime, anywhere, and for any species.